During Nazi Germany, many terrible men sealed their names in the universal history of cruelty, leaving several blank pages for the Nazi death ladies who knew how to fill them with blood. Today, we will focus on 3 specific cases whose bloody history has sent chills even through the toughest courts of post-war Europe. Maria Mandel, the Beast of Auschwitz, who sent 500,000 people to their deaths, including women and children. Ilse Koch, infamous as the Bitch of Buchenwald, who perpetrated carnage among Holocaust victims simply for pleasure, and designed a sinister wardrobe made from the skin of her victims. Lastly, Violette Morris, the Gestapo's hyena, a pioneering woman in many respects but remembered for her role as a torturer in Hitler's infamous security service. These women have left an indelible mark on Nazism. While the Führer aspired to have women dedicated to arts or diplomacy, the death ladies, unafraid to dirty their hands, decided to go a step further. That's why today we will tell their stories. Let's begin. Many fears haunted the Jews confined in the sinister Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Any act deviating from the strict behavior protocol imposed by the Nazis, in short, total submission, ended in torture and death. Even a slight misstep during the long marches between barracks or dropping a brass plate during their meager breakfasts was cause for punishment. But there was an even more terrifying prospect that any of these things would happen under the watchful gaze of Maria Mandel, the Beast of Auschwitz, a woman so brutal that her mere presence alarmed prisoners, and her direct gaze was a sentence to the gas chambers. The SS camp leader forged a fearsome reputation, to the point where her own subordinates whispered behind her back about her lack of humanity. In front of Mandel, Jewish women worked until exhaustion. They preferred to push their tired bodies beyond limits and die that same night in the cold barracks rather than provoke the beast. Any sign of weakness was seen by the brutal woman as an act of rebellion, punished with the severest penalties. Old, women, or children, no one escaped the savage martiality of the Nazi officer. Maria Mandel was born on January 10, 1912 in Münzkirchen, a small Austrian town. The daughter of a well-off family, she was a girl who had everything and who had access to a very good education. Maria did not live through the horrors of the First World War like many of the Germans or Austrians who would accompany Hitler to the end. On the contrary, while these communities were sinking into one of the worst crises in their history, Maria was completing her secondary education at Bürgerschule, a center that trained future young professionals in commerce and crafts. During this time, the future Nazi officer enjoyed enormous popularity in the city, as she was a young woman of superb beauty, desired by boys and admired by her classmates. However, the fragile bubble of youthful prosperity in which Maria Mandel lived was about to burst. After graduating and seeking to enter the workforce, she discovered that the world had changed. In order to work in Germany during the interwar period, a permit from the National Socialist Party was required, which Maria managed to obtain. She worked alongside her father for a while, but the relationship with her mother became increasingly difficult, so she decided to leave home. Mandel suffered greatly from the eviction, as she could not find any stable work, and after 10 unsuccessful attempts, she decided to turn to her family again. In 1938, thanks to a contact, Maria was hired as a guard at Lichtenberg, one of the first German internment centers. Although she had trained as a future business professional, she was not in a position to turn down any opportunity. But this would be the fateful moment that would seal her destiny as judge and executioner of hundreds of thousands of souls. In less than a year, the number of prisoners in Lichtenberg increased so much that the Ravensbrück concentration camp, reserved for women, was built, and in 1939 Maria was sent there. Once installed, she began to walk her path of brutality and laid the first stones on which she would build her infamous prestige. Mandel would review the prisoners and turn a simple administrative process into a sinister game of resistance. She forced them to do exercises, and if any of them fell or stopped due to fatigue, they were sent to the bunker, a space where she carried out terrible punishments, such as floggings or psychological humiliation. Over the years, she increased the violence of her methods, which would reach their peak of evil in 1942, when she was promoted to SS camp chief and sent to Auschwitz. On October 7th, when she arrived at the enormous prison, Maria discovered that she was the highest authority in the entire complex. She only had to answer to Commander Rudolf Höss. In the camp, she found a huge amusement park where she could unleash all her malice. The beast was about to break free. Mandel, with total enjoyment and impunity, unleashed a wave of violence on the prisoners. With sinister malice, she drowned newborn babies in tubs of water, while the helpless, desperate mothers watched on as their children were brutally murdered. She sent pregnant women to crematoria to be burned alive. She whipped women to death who died from beatings or simply from bleeding to death. But even all this brutality did not seem to satisfy her perverse appetite for evil. Maria had a habit of adopting Jewish prisoners as pets, forcing them to stay by her side or even participate in her macabre tortures, only to grow bored and unleash her cruelty on them. Some claim that she also had a secret affair with Dr. Joseph Mengele, and that she enjoyed participating in her lover's sinister experiments. By the end of the war, Mandel was sent to the Dachau concentration camp, where she didn't stay long due to the fall of Berlin. Little is known about her time in the infamous complex, although it is known that she fled to Austria, her native country, before the Allies entered the extermination camps. However, 10 days after her arrival, she was captured by the Americans, who detained her for nearly a year until she was tried. In 1947, after an exhaustive trial, Maria Mandel was found guilty of the deaths of 500,000 people, including children. In her final statement, the beast denied all responsibility for her actions. "I had neither whip nor dog. Performing my service at Auschwitz, I was hindered by Rudolf Höss's terrible severity. I was totally dependent on the commander, and I could not impose any penalty." Despite invoking obedience due, her sentence was not lifted, and on January 24, 1948, Maria Mandel was sentenced to death by hanging. Her still young body swung lifeless, now devoid of all the beauty that had made her famous in her adolescence, before the eyes of some surviving prisoners and relatives of her victims, who could finally rest in peace. Violette Morris's case is quite different from the other women on this list, as although she ended up working for Nazism, the French-born athlete achieved profound recognition in her personal life before Hitler's advance. Morris was born in France in 1893, had a peaceful childhood, and spent her entire adolescence as a pupil in a convent. Upon finally entering the world, she decided she would be a woman different from those of her time, and her first act of rebellion was related to the world of sports. At the age of 15, she began practicing all kinds of physical activities, such as cycling, swimming, weightlifting, tennis, and even boxing. In 1914, she married Cyprien Gourand, but it was not a happy marriage. Violette spent little time with her husband, instead dedicating herself to practicing discus throwing, javelin, and soccer, sports strictly for men. She developed her muscles to a bodybuilder's level and was said to be as strong as a bear. An adrenaline enthusiast, she enjoyed racing cars, which allowed her to serve as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross during World War I. She also worked as a courier on a motorcycle during the brutal Battle of Verdun. After the conflict ended, and following a few months hospitalized due to pleurisy, she continued dedicating her life to sports. Between 1921 and 1924, she set several records in shot put, discus, and javelin throwing. She was also a national boxing champion, won several car races, and achieved numerous gold medals in women's Olympics. During this time, she also decided to divorce her husband, began dressing as a man, and declared her lesbianism to the world. A true pioneer, Violette became a symbol for intellectuals and artists of her time. Morris even underwent a double mastectomy, removing both breasts to better fit into racing cars. Of course, her rebellion against the system had terrible consequences. She was persecuted, accused of immorality by the justice system on more than one occasion, and publicly criticized, especially from more conservative or religious circles. By the late 1920s, Violette had serious conflicts with some Jews, including the owner of the property she rented, which is believed to have fueled anti-Semitic sentiments within her. But the final straw was a complaint filed by the French Federation of Sports, accusing Violette of cross-dressing for wearing men's trousers. Despite Morris's defenses, the court ruled against her, and she was barred from representing her country in official competitions. This deepened a venomous resentment in the athlete's heart, which would be exploited by none other than the German SS. It is believed that the Sicherheitsdienst, the Nazi intelligence service, contacted Violette after she made public statements criticizing France for the trial. Exploiting her resentment, the Nazis invited her as an honored guest to the 1936 Berlin Olympics. During her stay, Morris became fascinated by German National Socialism, which exhibited all the strength she believed her own country lacked. It was there that she was convinced to work for Hitler's secret service. Indeed, Morris was the ideal spy. She was acquainted with French officials, intellectuals, and athletes. She had contacts in all institutions, in addition to a public profile that allowed her access to the city's darkest corners and government buildings. Violette obtained strategic plans of Paris, key information about French defenses like the Maginot Line, and other data that ensured the successful advance of Blitzkrieg, the German strategy of rapid and coordinated attacks with tanks. But her real notoriety came during the Nazi occupation of France, when Violette Morris worked as an interrogator for the collaborationist police, as well as an infiltrator in the resistance. According to survivor testimonies, the athlete was extremely sadistic, especially cruel towards other women. Her main pleasure was torture and physical punishment, which, due to her immense strength, often left victims on the brink of death. Few details are known about her activities with the Sicherheitsdienst, but the French remember her by her nickname, the hyena of the Gestapo, a lady who enjoyed tearing her prey apart. However, Morris would not escape unscathed, as on April 26, 1944, a French resistance commando unit ambushed her car, and she died under a hail of bullets. Her life remains highly debated to this day, and some revisionist historians claim that the hyena of the Gestapo is a legend constructed without solid evidence about Violette's life, though there are no clear records to confirm or refute this. Unlike Maria Mandel, Ilse Koch did not have a hierarchical role within the SS, but rather enjoyed the privileges of being the wife of a high-ranking officer, Field Colonel Karl Koch. She was a woman who was considered very beautiful by German standards. She delighted in wearing provocative clothing in front of the Jewish prisoners at the Buchenwald concentration camp, where she became known as the Slut. Ilse Koch was born on September 22, 1906 in Dresden, a small town in German Saxony. The daughter of a middle-class family, she always displayed a calm character, which in no way foreshadowed the profound violence she would spread as an adult. At the age of 15, she left school to work first in a factory, and then in a bookstore as a saleswoman. The young Ilse developed great social skills, and along with her beauty, she became irresistible to the boys who visited the premises. Little by little, she became known among the Nazi officers, who involved her in political activity, to the point that she forged friendships with members of the SS. By 1932, Ilse was already a German femme fatale, with deep contacts in the structure of National Socialism, and she took advantage of her influence to get a job as a secretary in the party. The charming young woman continued to attract the attention of all the men she met, until she found herself face to face with Heinrich Himmler himself, the head of the SS. Although he was married, He considered that the exquisite Ilse was an excellent match for a young Aryan, and he introduced her to Karl Koch, one of his most important aides who served as colonel at the Sachsenhausen camp. Whether Heinrich had the eye of Cupid or exerted a certain amount of pressure on his right hand, Koch and Ilse married in 1936. But it was in 1939 that the couple really connected, thanks to the sinister atrocities they carried out together at the Buchenwald extermination camp. Although the Kochs already had children, after the mandatory period of dedication to parenthood established by the Reich, they returned to the camp command with a renewed sense of cruelty. Karl was already a known sadist and was noted for his methods of torture, but far from appeasing him, Ilse upped the ante, and the couple launched into a bloodthirsty frenzy of abuse. The Kochs were known for returning to the most brutal traditional tortures of medievalism. We are talking about branding prisoners using red-hot irons, crushing their limbs with hammers, and whipping them with barbed wire or whips with razor blades. But what awaited the prisoners at Villa Koch, the estate where the family lived in Buchenwald, was even worse. Ilse had become a woman drawn to perversion in different ways. According to the Germans themselves, she organized orgies in her home and then feasted on torture with the Jewish prisoners. Whether with friends or strangers, the young woman showed an appetite for extreme emotions that was impossible to satisfy. To appease his wife's needs, Karl ordered the construction of a sort of pavilion of excess, a bunker of horror, where Ilse could carry out her events, whether sexual or bloody. The building measured 40 meters wide by 100 meters long and housed several rooms equipped for carrying out torture or carrying out orgies, with furniture built to cause indescribable pain or mirrored rooms that provided a 360-degree view of the feast. The Buchenwald Fox House of Terror was the scene of the brutality unleashed by Nazism. In the morning, Ilse would take a walk through the estate's gardens, then visit the camp where she delighted in whipping the Jewish prisoners. Any reason would arouse the Germans' violence, and her punishments in broad daylight became more brutal every day. One of her favorite activities was setting dogs on pregnant women to cause them terror and serious injuries. But the most macabre was yet to begin, as Koch discovered a perverse pastime that would forever change her relationship with the victims of the Holocaust. Ilse began asking for Jews to be skinned after becoming interested in the tattoos of some prisoners. She wanted to keep the drawings as a sort of sinister memento and used them to make lamps. But she didn't stop there. She also began making props and dissecting heads and other body parts that she hung in his home, as if she were the famous serial killer Ed Gein.
After General Patton toured the camp, he ordered the mayor of the nearby city of Weimar to bring 1,000 citizens to Buchenwald to be shown the crematorium and other evidence of Nazi atrocities. The Americans wanted to ensure that the German people would take responsibility for Nazi crimes. Many of them were crying, and some of them even fainted after seeing the dead bodies, starved prisoners behind barbed wire fences, as well as a table display of paintings on human skins, lampshades made of human skin, various parts of the human body preserved in alcohol, and 2 heads which were shrunk to 1/5 their normal size.
After being captured with her husband at the end of the war, several witnesses claimed to have seen prisoners' tattoos printed on Ilse's underwear. It is believed that she participated in more than 33,000 murders, some 5,000 of them directly with her husband. Although she managed to evade justice despite the overwhelming evidence against her, in 1951 she was sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes much less than those she had committed. Koch decided to end her own life in 1967 by hanging herself in her prison cell with the help of a white sheet. Those who knew her at the end of her life claimed that Ilse only spoke of being a sinner and that she did not deserve God's forgiveness. Perhaps this was true not only for her, but also for all the collaborators in the terrible massacre, which took place at one of the most brutal times in the history of mankind. Thank you very much for accompanying us to the end. If you like our content, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.